Hello and welcome to WeRise with Aaliyah. And today I'm here with the amazing Dr. Shehnaz Haqqani. And before I get this wrong, I would like you to introduce yourself. Is it Professor?
I'm a professor of religion, that's right.
Professor of Religion, amazing. And you specialize in gender, Islam, and sexuality. Is that right?
That's right. All things Islam, gender, sexuality, feminism, religious traditions, and change, the ways that religious traditions change with time, especially when it comes to the, gender and sexuality matters.
We're so lucky to have you on board with us as one of the teachers in our new membership called Rising Sisterhood. So this is something that's all brand new, and you are heading up the educate section of the membership. So just to briefly go over for those listeners who don't know what that is, Rising Sisterhood is based on 5 keys to empowerment, and they all cover different elements of the journey that a Muslim woman goes through to becoming empowered and living in her authentic truth and her most confident, joyous, fulfilled life. And it is a journey, it doesn't happen overnight. And we just really want to support women on this journey and to kind of not just create a community and a membership, but actually a movement of rising Muslim women who are just fed up of the patriarchal narratives that have been imposed on us for so many years. And we're waking up to the truth that actually this isn't what Islam is, and this isn't really what God wants for us. Before I start and we go any further, I have one question for you, Shehnaz, and that is what I ask everyone on the podcast, and that is, what makes you rise?
Yeah, I was wondering how, because Kausar answered that question so competently and so beautifully, and I was like, can I just say all of the above, like everything she said, like what she said, and so I think about that a lot. In my case, it is teaching and learning. I love learning, education. I'm deeply committed to education. One of the reasons why I'm going to be one of the educators for this movement, inshallah. I am very committed to all things Islamic feminism, and in particular, using religion as a means for empowerment, because I know religion can also be a means of oppression and injustice. And we know it has been, objectively speaking. So I love learning. I love talking to people. Our semester just ended, so my mind is on teaching right now. But I listen to a lot of podcasts on self-development and personal growth and just evolution of, just becoming a better person. My favorite podcast is literally called How to Be a Better Human. So what makes me rise is listening to these podcasts, listening to experts who have dedicated their entire lives to teaching the rest of us. Here are the things that work. Here are the things that don't work. About how to change our life for the better, how to be happier. And by happier, I mean more content and more at peace with your life, how to be more fulfilled. So that's what I like. That's the thing that I'm committed to, and that's how I rise.
Amazing. That is so good to hear. And that actually makes me think of a question that I wanted to ask you, which is, you say that we all have this capacity to be more content and to be more empowered and to improve our lives in some way. So, in your opinion, what do you think is one of the biggest causes of discontent in current times for Muslim women specifically?
I love that question. A huge part of it is the withholding knowledge is a big one, right? One of the ways that patriarchies and all forms of patriarchies, not just religious one, but I study religious patriarchy in particular. So one of the ways that religious patriarchies thrives is to make us basically to gaslight us, right? To gaslight us. And that's a great way to disempower us, but to withhold information from us. I mean, I'll give one quick example of my latest research. My second book, inshallah, will be on the topic of Muslim women who marry non-Muslims, and how many of them know, or how many Muslims have ever been taught in interfaith relationships that the Prophet Muhammad Wasallam's own daughter Zainab was married to a polytheist, no less, for 20 years. Right? He never pressured her. He never made her leave that marriage. And she stayed married to him for decades. And he converted eventually. And he's like decades after their marriage. And not because the prophet made him, There was no like compulsion, etc. So all of that to say, with the withholding of knowledge, and so it doesn't even occur to us that there might be more to the story. And the only reason that might occur to you is to have certain experiences, right? A Muslim woman who's going through a terrible divorce and then realizes for the first time in her life that, oh, divorce laws are actually pretty oppressive and pretty sexist, or they no longer serve the context in which she's functioning in. And so she begins to question things, and she then realizes, okay, if this is the only reason that I know that now is because of experience with injustice when it comes to the context of divorce, what other areas in religion are also harming us? And then she might see connections between, say, same-sex relations, the existence of LGBTQ Muslims. And then with these experiences, we form connections, we make connections, and then we decide to stand together. So I think the withholding of knowledge is a major one. The gaslighting, the suppression of just constantly being told, that's not true, that's not what Islam says, that's not how to be a Muslim. And it's grilled in our heads from the times that we're young. Our own families aren't helpful necessarily. So the withholding of knowledge, which starts from as early as when we're born, right? The ways that our families might treat us compared to how they might treat our male siblings or brothers. And I truly believe that that is one of the most significant reasons why we don't even know that there's an option, there's an alternative option, until we get to a point like I did. I mean, in my case, I had to go all the way and get a PhD in it. I'm not recommending everybody get a PhD in it, but it has been the most empowering thing for me to be able to have gotten this PhD in Islamic studies with a focus on gender, to be able to shut down the patriarchy as it's happening to me, and as I experience it, as I witness it, and then I'm told, that's not what Islam says, that's not what Islam says. I get to say, wrong. And I get to ask these questions, including, what do you mean by Islam? Like, what are you referencing? How are you defining Islam? Because we don't have the same definition of Islam. And let's stop pretending that we do. So I think knowledge, I'm going to keep coming back to knowledge because I'm an educator, but I think the withholding of knowledge ends up affecting our lives in ways that we might not realize until we actually are in a situation where we have to experience the impacts of that.
That is so, so true. And some of the things that just jumped out to me there is, it takes you having an experience, which is why lived experience and listening to women, hearing their narratives and forming our opinions, taking into consideration women's lived experiences rather than just focusing on, I don't know, the lived experiences of people 1400 years ago, or only of men, or only of scholars who are quite often very isolated and antisocial and not really engaging with the realities of society. And so I guess that is what the power of Islamic feminism is as well, in that it centers women, it centers their lived experience, and it aims to produce new knowledge around how Islam can actually be empowering for women.
Absolutely. Which there's something, I think a lot about this. I think a lot about the impacts of Islamic feminist scholarship, experiential authority. People often assume, and one of the counter arguments to this idea is that, feminist scholarship is subjective, it's biased, etc., as though patriarchy is unbiased, as though the alternative, patriarchal scholarship, patriarchal interpretations and practices Islam are not biased.
Yeah, no, that all happens in a complete social vacuum, doesn't it? Because men are just completely objective. Yeah,
right? Except something that I had never thought about until some scholars pointed it out, and Muslim feminist scholars pointed out, is this. Patriarchal Islam, so a lot of feminist scholars or scholars of Islamic feminism, like Leila Ahmed, have differentiated between the different kinds of Islam. The textual tradition, which a lot of Muslims are taught to perceive as objective, right? Quote unquote. It's so objective. It's the default. It's the correct interpretations. Apparently, no human is involved in that process. It's from God, which is a form of shirk, as Amina Wadud points out in her scholarship, because we're assuming that God is the author of that patriarchy and God is not the author of that patriarchy. And then all things that women write and produce becomes subjective because it's rooted in experience. But Scott Kugel has a really good point in one of his discussions on this topic. He argues that when the male scholars are producing this textual tradition, they're also being biased. They're also talking about their experience, right? They're just not explicitly referencing their experience, but they're benefiting from it. every single interpretation of Islam that has historically been considered to be mainstream and the orthodox, the correct interpretation of Islam, has benefited men.
Because
right? And
because patriarchy has been the default.
Exactly.
So you don't even have to explicitly acknowledge the influence of patriarchy on what you're saying, because it's just what we're immersed in all of the time. You don't need to.
Exactly. It's the air that we breathe. It's the air. It's the air we breathe. And so, of course, like, you don't have to explicitly say, this is patriarchy, this is my experience. It's understood that men's interpretations are rooted in their experiences, like women's interpretations are, as everybody's interpretations are, and that every interpretation becomes subjective because it is experience-based. It's just that we don't think of men's experiences as being subjective, and instead that's the default, because of the default human that we're often talking about, not just in religion, to be sure, not just in Islam, for sure, in philosophy, in all things science, in the hard sciences, in the stuff, we're thinking of the male figure, the male human being, as a default human, and that is deeply troubling and problematic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, while we're on this topic of experience, was there a moment in your life that kind of switched you on to Islamic feminism?
Yes. When it was 2023, we had moved to a new neighborhood, and my parents, I don't know when I became a feminist exactly, but I know that I was identifying as a feminist in high school. And so we moved to this new neighborhood, and my parents were making me and my younger sister go to the mosque. And neither of us wanted to go to the mosque, the local mosque, because we didn't have a good experience with the mosque. Like, my parents go there frequently, especially in Ramadan. And so I never liked it. I didn't like being in the back. I didn't like having a separate entrance. I didn't like that the sermons were always deeply troubling, never inspiring. I've honestly almost never attended a sermon that was actually relevant and hopeful and inspiring, that made me want to be a better person, except things that I listened to by Muslim women, right? By virtual sermons given by Muslim feminists. That's when I'm inspired. That's when I love humanity. I love the world. I love God. They are Muslim feminism is the reason I'm still a Muslim, to be completely honest. So I was at the mosque. I was not there at the mosque yet. I'm resisting. I'm fighting my parents. I'm not going. And my dad says, just go once and see how you feel about it. And I'm like, fine. My younger sister and I were dropped off at the mosque, and we didn't know who the teacher was, but my dad had learned there's a Sunday school there, or Saturday, I forget. We go there, and I kid you not, Aaliyah, my teacher says, this is the very first session, okay? So she's a Pakistani immigrant Muslim woman. She's teaching the Quran to these women. It's a women's class only, and then children also, but there were no men there. And she says, sisters, for her, so the Quran teaching happens, and then there's like a discussion. And she says, sisters, you do not have to cook for your husbands. You don't have to serve your husbands. And she goes on, you don't have to clean, all of these things. And I was like, oh my God. And all of the sisters are like, sister, what are you saying? And she was like, yeah, you don't. Those are not your obligations. If your husband makes you want to cook, you can say, "Well, hire a cook." If he wants to make you clean, you can say, "Hire a cleaner." I don't have to do any of this, right? So all of the women were shocked. I was absolutely shocked to hear this, and I was like,
"So can I just ask, how old were you at that time? Like a teenager?
17, maybe.
Okay, right.
Yeah, like I was a teenager, and I was like, oh my God. And my sister and I were like, this is our space. We're coming back here. This is our person, right? So for the first time, I had a very positive experience in the mosque. And I loved it. I would go there. We went there. I then look forward to going to that mosque every Sunday, Saturday. And then I would come home and I would tell my mom, I'm not cooking because sister, she knew the sister. And I was like, sister said, I don't have to do this. And my mom was like, I think she joked one day and said, I'm not going to let you go back there anymore or something. That's not the idea. Because it was shocking, right? Because Aaliyah, for so many of us, and certainly for me and for my mother, if it's not sexist, if it is not demeaning me, if it is not making me feel stupid and behind and inferior, then it's not Islam. As a woman, if it's not harmful to me, then it's not Islam. And so if it sounds too good to be true, like, sisters, you're completely equal to your spouse. You do not have to do the following things. Your husband cannot treat you like this, right? Then that's too good. That's too nice. There's no way that's Islamic. And that broke my heart. Like, that was devastating to realize that that's how we see. And so my mom still will say something like, your Islam is too modern. And I'm like, tell me more about what about my Islam is modern, and what does modernity mean here? What does being modern mean to you? And what she means is, you think of women as equal to men. You think of all humans as being equal, which is true. That is a modern concept. But I argue that no, that's equally Islamic, as that's just as Islamic as the idea that we're not equal. Like, who decided that the patriarchal interpretation of Islam or practice of Islam is the default interpretation, the only correct or the objective interpretation? Who? But yeah, that was the beginning. But I learned somehow at some point between then, I learned about Islamic feminism, and I started reading scholarship by Amina Wadud, Kishali, etc. And I began to see that, wow, there's so much more to Islam. And I felt so incredibly betrayed by everything that I had been taught about Islam. That betrayal is something that I will never let go of, that Muslim women who read my blog, I used to blog a lot, and who watch my YouTube channel, they tell me they feel the same kind of betrayal. And in their case, a lot of them reach out to me when they're on the verge of leaving Islam. And then they find resources like what you're producing right now, Aaliyah, and what I've produced and what other Muslim feminists have produced. And then they go, oh, I did not know this was an option, because instinctively I knew that patriarchy could not be legitimate Islamically. And I feel like I was saved by Islamic feminism, right? Like, I would have left otherwise. And by saved, I don't mean like from hellfire, etc., but I mean on a deeply personal, spiritual level. I love religion. I love Islam. I love God, and I want to stay in Islam. And I refuse to let the other side, I refuse to let Islamic patriarchy have its control and maintain its control. And Islam is for all of us. There's room for every single person within a religion. And I, as I teach in all my classes, religion is a spectrum. There's a room for it. There's room for it for every single person at some point in the spectrum. You could hate it. You could love it. You could be somewhere in the middle. You could be on one side, on the other. You could be close to one side, close to the other. You could be practicing. You could be not practicing. You could be like, you could practice it sometimes and not other times. There is room for every single one of us. And we get to nobody gets to take that away from us. And that's something that I've been holding on to. I had a friend who, a few years ago, I refused to identify myself as pious because I felt like, or religious, because I felt like piety in Islam is in our spaces, and many of the spaces that we're part of, is understood as, you cover your hair if you're a girl, you pray 5 times a day, you're obedient to the male members of your household, question things. And so I remember in a conversation with a dear male friend of mine, a feminist ally, and I said something like, well, I'm not pious, or something like that. And he said, Shehnaz, don't forget, you get to define piety for you. Like, don't let the religious bigots define piety for you. If you love God, if you love Islam, whether or not you pray 5 times a day, whether or not you fast every single day in Ramadan, it doesn't, whether or not you question things, you can be just as pious. If you believe that this is piety, then that's what piety is. And I've loved that, because now I get to say, I'm religious, I'm pious, and I don't have to cover my hair. I don't have to do these things that everyone else thinks that I should do, because they have very, very narrow ideas of what it means to be pious.
I love that so, so much. And it's so interesting, because I feel like I have had such similar conversations, with God, with other people, with myself, about redefining what Islam is and building my own relationship with God based on that definition, and not allowing other people to say that, oh, you're not that religious.
Right.
And I remember this one time at university, when I was only like about 18, 19, and I was going to all the ISOC events, and had my little Muslim girly crew. I was the only non-hijabi in there, and this very superior kind of like hijabi student with everything came over to speak to me, my best friend, who was a hijabi, and said, in a really, really patronizing tone, oh, when you become practicing, then
No.
something or other. And I didn't even have to say anything, because my friend jumped in there and went, excuse me, she is very religious, thank you very much. And that was validating. But even then, I felt like I didn't really need that validation. I was like, hey, I'm here. Like, I'm in the Islamic society. Like, I'm a Muslim, whether you recognize me or not. And is how we self-identify. And I agree with you that so many Muslim women are being turned away from Islam because of the deeply toxic conservative narratives that and it just feels like it's getting more and more conservative as we go along. And I see it all the time in Muslim women's spaces, whether it's online or in person, where people are very quick to say that if you do such and such, you are out of the fold of Islam. If you do this, that, and the other, you can't call yourself a Muslim. And it's like the feeding all the time. Like they are literally declaring people kafirs left, right, and center for the smallest of things. And you just think, wow, that in itself is not my Islam.
Right. Yeah, and it's such a relief to not be in that Islam. Yeah.
No, exactly. It's like, oh, I'm glad my Islam is not your Islam. And my Islam, you know, you said it's a spectrum. That's what I always say is it's a broad sea.
There you go. Exactly.
That's my phrase that I always use, that Islam is a broad sea and there is room for everyone. And, you know, it's amazing that we both use such a similar kind of idea to encourage people that you can express yourself within the faith and with the freedom to just be yourself as well and develop your own relationship with God. So yeah, absolutely. That is the beauty of Islamic feminism.
I felt so much more free when I realized I didn't have to judge people. I didn't have to, when I stopped being, at some point in my life, I know I was conservative. I don't know in what ways. Like, I think of like, I know I was conservative when it came to women's like roles. Okay. Especially and women's dress code. I did believe that the hijab is mandatory for a long time.
I used to think that. I even wore it for a bit.
Same. And I still, like, I'll still occasionally do it, but it's not because I believe it's mandatory anymore. But I remember fighting with other Muslim women, like, you have to, and like, Allah says so. And then I learned other perspectives on it. But when I stopped, but I know for a fact that I shouldn't say for a fact, but I don't think I was ever, for example, homophobic or that my gay Muslim friends weren't legitimate Muslims. And I'm so proud of myself. Like, it would be okay if I did at one point and I don't anymore because we evolve. But I can't remember a time in which during which I thought that was problematic, or for women to lead mixed gender prayers. Like, I don't think I ever thought that was problematic either. But I do remember believing very strongly for a long time that you have to cover your hair. And that was the Quran teacher that I was at the mosque that I mentioned. That was her idea as well. And she tried really hard to convince us also in our classes that men were the primary breadwinners and women should obey men, etc. I never, ever for a moment believed that. But in some other ways, I did have a lot of conservative ideas about what it means to be a man and a woman. And then at some point, when I stopped thinking that way, I have felt so much lighter. I don't have to correct people anymore. I'm happy to have conversations and I don't have to defend myself anymore. People come to my YouTube channel and try to correct me and fight me and want to debate me. And I hate the word debate, as my friends will tell you. But I'm like, look, I'm not here to debate. If you want to listen to what I have to say, great. I'm here to listen to what you have to say, but I'm not going to try to convince you the other one way or the other. And I don't care. I assure you that I've heard your perspective because I study this for a living.
Exactly. That's exactly what I say. I always say to people, I'm not here to convince anyone. Yeah. I'm not here to convince anyone. And it's amazing how when you put anything out on social media, people always jump on it and try and convince you or try mansplain to you why what you've said is wrong. And it's like, look, as you said, we've heard your mainstream opinion over and over and over again. We don't need people just to keep parroting the same mainstream ideas. This is a challenge to that. And obviously people don't like that, do they?
No. And I'm like, look, if you're not ready to hear this yet, I'm okay with that. Women, I know that LGBTQ Muslims, women, feminists, people in interfaith relationships will come to my channel. They'll find me when it's their time. And I'm here when they're ready for that. If someone isn't ready to hear this perspective yet, and also for many of them, if it's the first time they're hearing it, they're going to get defensive. And I'm studying counseling, mental health counseling on the side right now. And I get what it means to be defensive because in some way they interpret my practice, my beliefs about Islam as an attack on their identity. 1.8 billion Muslims, and you're going to tell me that I'm attacking you as an individual or the entire religion because I disagree with you? Like, we've got a lot of work to do on you. Like, I hope that you will someday utilize the resources that exist in this world. If you have access to my YouTube channel, you have access to the internet where a bunch of resources exist that can teach you. Don't just slow down. Stop making everything about yourself. There are other ways to engage with somebody you disagree with, and fighting them is not it. It's not necessary. It's not productive. So I'm very confident in what I teach and in what I show and what my practice of Islam is. And if you wanna listen to it, you're welcome to. And if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Exactly. I love that. And actually, on that note, where can people find your channel? Because it has, in my journey, your channel has been just incredible and such a rich resource for me to have my worldview expanded. My mind has been blown by some of the things that I've learned on your channel on what the patriarchy, and I'm always sharing it because I've been following you for a long time, so it's an absolute honor to have you on this podcast, and then also as one of the teachers in Rising Sisterhood, because you are such a fantastic teacher. And I think the way you can speak to the core of matters without kind of beating around the bush, without sugarcoating, but also really, really strongly holding on to your Muslim identity. And you're kind of that living example of, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't have to, and it comes across that it's not just an intellectual argument for you. It is
Right.
deeply spiritual.
And it's personal, absolutely. Yeah, so my YouTube channel is called What the Patriarchy. The question mark and exclamation mark at the end. It took me years to come up with that title because I was like, what do I call this? So
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, that is.
And when my niece was little, I swear she came up with the patriarchy all on her. Well, she observed it all on her own, and then she was 3 years old, and I was like, she started observing, like, wait, so why are women here doing this at the mosque, and why are men doing that, or why are there more boys in my sister's school photo than there are girls, and so on. And I was like, sweet, oh my God, you sweetheart. I was like, it's called the patriarchy. Let me tell you all about it. Set her down. I gave her the language for it, right? And then she would call me, and I kid you not, Ali, she would call me and say, Shanu, she calls me Shanu, patriarchy happened today. And so and then she would give me an example of a male classmate doing a certain thing, and then the girls responding a certain way, and then things like that, or something at the mosque, or, oh my God, my favorite one, because I was like, this girl is brilliant, mashallah. She's now magically like 14 years old. But she was reading a prayer book, and it's from, Islam, something they got at the mosque that was teaching girls how to pray and boys how to pray. And she sent me pictures of it, and she was like, why are the girls taking up such a little space? And like, girls have to, like, we do this as opposed to like this that men do. And like, men do this when they do the sajda, right? And women have to do it like this. And she was like, she said something, and I was like, I'd never noticed that. And I was like, because patriarchy. And so all of that to say, I wanted to title the YouTube channel either because patriarchy or patriarchy happened today or something like that. But I went with what the patriarchy. Wanted to put some humor in there because I didn't want to like scare everybody away. But also, so it's on YouTube, youtube.com, and then / what the patriarchy.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Thank you. And the whole idea is to produce as much content as possible on Islam and feminism. The way that I've done that mostly so far is by reviewing or reading or summarizing books that have to do with Islam and feminism, Islam and gender, and offering new perspectives, but also just things like, in the summer, I'm always annoyed with the way that we treat Muslim women's bodies, and the selfishness of men when they show all the skin they possibly can when they're swimming, and then they correct the rest of us and police our bodies. And I think it's incredibly selfish of men to show their skin while telling the rest of us that we cannot, because it's not like they have to show skin. So why do they do it? And I have no respect for a man who himself will not cover his body when he's swimming or when he's at the beach, and then require the female members of his family to do so. So
like his wife will be covered head to toe, like in a bikini.
Yeah.
And he'll be topless in little shorts. Yeah. And you're like, right, okay, that's fair, isn't it?
He has nothing to lose by covering too. Just to be like, okay, out of respect for you, out of the fact that but out of the fact that you have to do this, and it probably isn't comfortable to be wearing a bikini, to be covered from head to toe in the water. Out of respect for that, I'm going to cover my body. Even though I don't have to, I'm going to do it, right?
Because modesty is prescribed on men and women.
Yeah, exactly. But conveniently, modesty's rules are gendered and sexualized and sexual. I mean, everything is gendered, but conveniently, all of the rules, modesty rules, end up benefiting men. Right? Everything. I mean, it's patriarchy. It benefits men and it harms women. And so my point is, in the YouTube channel, I try to talk about topics related to gender, sexuality, Islam, feminism, women's experiences, certainly my own experiences, and then offering a perspective that may not be mainstream And I'm okay with that. And I know that it helps people who are ready to hear it.
It definitely does help. And that whole topic of modesty, hijab, etc., that is going to be one of the things that you'll be teaching as well in the Rising Sisterhood. And I'm sure we will come back and do another podcast on that, because there is so much to say on that particular topic. But just going back to something you were saying about your new books in Islam. So you've actually had a new book out yourself, haven't you?
I have. Actually, right here. Yes, this is my book. It's called, I almost forget the title, Feminism, Tradition, and Change in Contemporary Islam, Negotiating Islamic Law and Gender. I love it. I love the cover. Oh, it's just so beautiful.
It's beautiful.
And it's somehow 400 pages. I don't know how that happened. And it is published with One World. And it came out in October 2024.
Put the link to buy that as well below, because I'm sure it will be an amazing read.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed writing it. I love chapter 7 in particular. I think it's chapter 7, the one on female-led mixed gender prayers, where I get into modesty and gendered and sexualized ideas of modesty and privatizing, not privatizing, but the idea of privacy during prayer for women. Because there was a lot of resistance in the book for women leading mixed gender prayers. And I wanted to really unpack where that resistance was coming from. Because it's not like Muslim scholars have never supported women leading mixed gender prayers. And the resistance today is, interestingly, just, it's so politicized in a way that it just wasn't historically.
I can't wait to read it, and I will link it below as well. And as I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be very interested in what you've written. Before we wrap up, I would just love to ask you one more question, which is, if there are women right now who are feeling disheartened or kind of feeling on the fringes of their Muslim community, if they have doubts, if they have worries about what Islam actually says about women's, role and status, their rights in Islam, what advice would you give them if they are having these doubts but they're worried to voice them?
There's a couple of things that I might recommend. One is finding a safe community to the extent possible. We don't always know who's safe around us. Sometimes it's our partner, sometimes it's our parents, sometimes not. But if you can at all find start with one person who you think would be a safe enough space for you to say, I'm having doubts. Right? I'm struggling with this particular topic in Islam. That's a great start. But also, more than anything else, Aaliyah, more than anything else, I want to tell every single person, and not just women, but if anybody who has in any way been harmed to any extent, because we've all been harmed to different extents, and men too are harmed by patriarchy. And I hope that people know that. I wish we would acknowledge that patriarchy harms every one of us. But if at the very least pay attention to your intuition. It is very, very unlikely that your intuition is wrong. If you feel like something you're listening to is off, if something feels off about what the preacher at the mosque said, what the imam at the mosque said, what your mom told you or your dad told you about a certain topic on Islam, what your spouse believes, what something that you're listening to is saying, if it feels off, it's most likely off. And by off here, I don't mean because it's too progressive. I mean, it is potentially likely to harm somebody, right? Because you might be thinking, wait, the example that I often think about is, this is so sad, it breaks my heart. And which is why I'm so glad you're doing the work you're doing, Aaliyah. I know that class has everything to do with it, access to knowledge, which is why I love what you're doing, because I know it's also like in terms of pricing, it's very, very accessible to people. So I really appreciate that. Several years ago, I think for the research for my book, I listened to a YouTube video with Yasir Qadi. A Muslim woman says in the audience, I'm troubled by the idea that the hur in the Quran is a woman and women don't get anyone and that our husbands get the hur. And like she's you could tell in her voice that she was sad. And she's pointing out the injustice of that, right? In other words, and I have no reason then to go to heaven. And why would I go to heaven just to be somebody's hur, or for my husband to get a hur? And I don't there's no incentive to heaven, right? And the way that Yasir Qadi responds is he shuts her down. He says he basically says, this is a modern idea. This is a feminist idea. This is deal with it. Women don't get a hur. The hur is a woman. The Quran says so, end of story. And he shuts her down. And I want to say to her, And I want to say to every other person who reads the Quran and they're troubled by this idea of the hur, one, it's okay to be troubled by it. Two, there are resources out there that show that, in fact, the idea of the hur and the idea of heaven and hell in the Quran changes from Meccan surahs and Medinan surahs. It's not the same. And so the point being, even the concept of the hur is open to discussion. It's not a done deal in the Quran. Nothing in religion is a done deal, to be very sure. But the way that he responds to her, it broke for her. I felt so sad for her. But if that is the people like Yasir Qadi are the people that we're turning to for knowledge, and then they shut us down like that, I'm going to leave. And I'm going to say, you know what, there's another religion out there that's not going to demonize me, that's not going to harm me like that, that's not going to denigrate me, that's not going to invalidate me or make me feel invalidated and make me feel like my questions are irrelevant and stupid, and I just either I accept this or or go to hell. Like that should not be those two should not be my options. To women like that and to other Muslims like that, trust your intuition. If it sounds off, if it sounds the way that the man responded to you sounds off, and what you're reading in the Quran or in the translations or interpretations feels off or sounds off, it's probably off. And that's when go and do your research. And one of the most beautiful things that I love about Islam is that when we go to do our research, when we're in that process, that's called jihad. I know that we hear of the word jihad as this violent thing, and it can be violent, right? Jihad can be violent. It's a struggle. A struggle can be violent when it becomes an actual war, but it can also be very, very nonviolent when it's happening within us. And as I try to figure out what the correct interpretations, quote unquote, might be, what it is that Allah wants from me, right? What it is that what Islam wants from me, that process is a jihad, and God doesn't care what you end up concluding from that process. What Allah cares most about is, what was that process like? Were you genuine? Could you honestly say, I utilized as much as I could, all the resources that I had access to, and I was genuine in my effort? And that's what matters more than anything else. And then if we die in that process, it's like we're fighting a jihad and then died in the process, in the middle of a jihad. We become martyrs in that way, right? So like we get a special status and so on, which is why I think as long as we're searching for the thing that's going to bring us closer to God, whatever that might be, it doesn't really matter in the end what the conclusion is. I mean, I hope it's something that's peaceful, that's loving, that truly brings you closer to God. And if it brings you closer to God, it should also be bringing you closer to people, to humanity. If it's making you hate some people over others, if it's making you favor some people over others, if it's making you choose sides, and then you end up losing sight of something as essential as human relationships with your family, with your children, with your friends of different religious traditions and different sects and so on, different ideological leanings, then maybe that's not the correct Islam.
I love that so much. That story about the woman asking Yasir that question, I saw something really similar recently, actually, about a woman asking Zakir Naik, another, yeah, the eye roll says it all. Yeah, and the way I'm sure you can imagine the way he shut her down for asking a question. And yeah, I've never really heard anyone explain that concept of jihad in the sense of that process of trying to understand, of questioning, of challenging. Really, the thing that makes it a jihad, isn't it, is the intention behind
Absolutely.
it. And if the intention is us trying to get closer to God, and sometimes it comes from a place of fear that we are losing our connection to God, that we are terrified that we're going to lose God if we keep thinking this way, and we can't reconcile what our intuition is saying with what is being taught to us. Am I going to lose God? Am I going to lose Islam? And that fear is then what propels us to go on this jihad, to get back to God, to get back to that original blueprint of that loving,
absolutely
compassionate God that we know is there.
Oh yeah.
And it's getting back to that truth. So yeah, absolutely, trusting your intuition. And that's actually another really key element of our teachings within Rising Sisterhood. It's all about really trusting and cultivating a relationship with our inner knowing, right? That is separate to the knowing that we have through our intellect and our mind. It's an embodied kind of knowing, and it's something very ancient and primordial. And, you know, there's a reason why we have this saying, you know, women's intuition, right? Because
absolutely,
we have got access to this other level of knowing that, you know, maybe men don't have, and or maybe that we're more in touch with it, but it's feared, and then
absolutely.
it's shut down, and we're told, no, that's shaitan. That's what we're
And
told.
which you know, so one is one, in case somebody is wondering, wait, how is this also a form, how is just seeking knowledge a form of jihad? The word jihad literally comes from the Arabic. The root word is jahada, which means to fight, and ijtihad, which is a very important concept in Islam. When we re-engage with the Quran, with Islam, with existing interpretations and practices of Islam, with existing doctrines, to modify them to fit a new context, that's also called ijtihad. And the idea is that that is supposed to be a struggle. You're supposed to be constantly struggling to get closer to God, and the closeness to God comes with struggling to find the best possible meaning of whatever it is that Allah wants from us, right? That struggle shouldn't be easy. It shouldn't always be obvious what the correct thing is. Sometimes it is. I mean, even ethics is a spectrum, right? It's something, things are not always easily the right or the wrong choices. And so so Islamic tradition is filled with ideas like your average Muslim scholar or every Muslim scholar is allowed to be wrong ultimately, but it's not, when you have a question as a Muslim person and you go to a Muslim scholar, it doesn't matter what actual answers they give you in the end. What matters more is their effort, right? So the jihad that they conducted in the process of arriving at that conclusion. That is why in Islam, it's a very popular idea that all opinions are correct. All scholarly opinions are correct because the assumption is that they worked really hard. They fought a jihad to get to that point. And so they are the ones who are accountable to God. They're the ones who are responsible if they give you the wrong answer to a question. You're not accountable, right? That's a common. I don't recommend that. I recommend doing your own research and then disagreeing with scholars as well, because we're not passive recipients of Islamic knowledge. We're also active participants in producing Islamic knowledge, right? But the idea is that the reason why I encourage everybody to be fighting their own jihad to attain the closeness to God and to figure out what God wants from them without necessarily relying or only relying on other sources and external sources, and rely on your own source, also your own intuition, is because the jihad that you're fighting internally, God loves it. There's value behind it. And God is paying attention. And also what you said to women's intuition, or just intuition in general, for women's intuition in particular, for those of us who have been harmed by religious traditions and by patriarchies in general, psychology has it's something that's becoming more popular in psychology research now, but our body keeps track of things that we experience, right? And so when it's negative, harmful experiences, say because of religious teachings or cultural teachings and norms and practices, our body is keeping track of that, right? And where we keep suppressing it. We're not processing it in a healthy way. We're not taught to process those experiences in a healthy way, and they eventually catch up to us, and then we have an intuition. We know, our body knows when something is wrong.
It can also be a nervous system response.
Yes, exactly.
That's what it is. Yeah. So even before our brains acknowledge it or understand what's happening, our bodies will tell us, because our nervous systems are tuned into that's safe and that's unsafe.
Exactly.
I have been harmed by that, so my body is going to react in some way, and I'm going to feel off about it. And you might not intellectually understand that at all, but you feel it, right?
Exactly.
And so, yeah, it's amazing how science is like catching up now to things like intuition. But yeah, wow, what a fascinating topic. I feel like I could just keep talking to you all night.
Me too. This is fun.
I know, right? We'll definitely have to have you on again. Can't wait.
Happy to do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me here today, Shehnaz. And I'll put all the links down below where everyone can find you, and to the Rising Sisterhood as well. And can't wait to have more of these conversations.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaliyah. I enjoyed this very much.